Good evening. Good evening. This is truly an honor. These are two women I have admired for a very long time, and I am sure I will continue to admire them, I hope, even longer. Nikky Finney was born in Conway, South Carolina, and is the John H. Bennett Jr. Chair in Creative Writing and Southern Letters at the University of South Carolina. She has a joint appointment in the Department of English, Language, and Literature in the African American Studies program. Finney has authored 5 books. Head Off and Split was awarded the 2011 National Book Award for Poetry. Her 6th book, Love Child, Hotbed of Occasional Poetry, Poems, and Artifacts, is due out April 1. Stay tuned. In 2017, she was one of 25 artists nationwide to receive the prestigious Art of Change Fellowship from the Ford Foundation. The award supports creating powerful works that advance freedom, justice, and inclusion. Henrie Monteith Treadwell was born in Columbia, South Carolina, and is the Director of Community Voices at Morehouse School of Medicine, where she studies healthcare for underserved populations and researches the health concerns of teenage African-American males, including prison health, health policy, and health services. She served for 16 years as the Program Director at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation of Battle Creek, Michigan, where she was responsible for initiatives to improve access to health coverage and services in the United States and Southern Africa. Treadwell, along with Robert Anderson and James Solomon, desegregated University of South Carolina, September 11, 1963. A prolific writer, scholar, and administrator, she has received numerous fellowships and has served as a consultant to many national organizations, including the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, and the Department of Health and Human Services Health Careers Opportunity Program. Treadwell has been or is a member of many professional organizations, such as the American Cell Biology Society, American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Association of University Women. Please join me in welcoming two of the most powerful voices on social justice issues. Thank you.
Would you also take the moment to turn your phones off or put them on mute?
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you? This is going to be passed between us because this is how you will hear us. And so I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you so much for coming and for being our witnesses tonight. I am about to throw my notes out the window. I feel it coming. But before I do that, I just want to say that you and I, Dr. Treadwell, have never had to my knowledge, a public or a private conversation.
Sure.
Though we have met before. And so when given the opportunity and afforded the invitation, I jumped at the chance to be here with you tonight. Sorry, my mom taught me not to say between every pause. And there she is sitting there listening to me. Wave, Mom. Okay. I want to say that I do not feel I consider you a reformer. I consider you an individual, a part of that generation of folks who put their physical, spiritual, intellectual presence in the line of great fire. And without you, thousands of black students would never have been able to come to the University of South Carolina. And of course, you did not do that alone, but I want to give you applause for doing that and for making that a part of your mission in life. We're going to talk about that a little later. But I also want to say that personally and professionally, I do not feel like I would be here. I do not feel like I would have a place at the University of South Carolina as a teacher, as an artist, and certainly I would not hold an endowed chair. So I feel like I am in a continuum of black women and black men who put their lives on the line. And were it not for what you all did, I wouldn't be here. And so I want to thank you publicly for that. I also want to say that were it not for the African American Studies program here at the University of South Carolina that is now in its 57th year, something amazing and wonderful like that, that also all of the history that is that this place holds for us would not be in the lights, if you will, like it is. So I want to honor that program, which I proudly hold. One of my positions is in African American Studies and English department. So I'm very proud of that relationship. So I'm going to start, if you all will, by reading something. You know, I'm a poet, right? So I gotta like pull out a poetry book, but it pertains. I promise, it pertains. I'm not going to read a poem, but I love epigraphs. And epigraphs, I find, are quotes around the world. Somebody has said something that just stuns me, and I have to like copy it down, and I don't know where it's going to work or fit, but I know I'm going to use it. I just don't know when or where. So I have a book of epigraphs, and I want to start with an epigraph. I promise it pertains. And then I will let you speak eventually. If this microphone can. Okay, here we go. You listening?
Yes.
I ask my students that. They don't answer. Quote, "You might think that a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. But a woman's eye can travel in a curved line when she needs to see something and somebody is trying to keep her from seeing it. Her eye can travel in a curved line to get there, and she will get there." Majeska Monteith Simpkins. I read that and I said, stop the presses. That's what my mother used to do when she used to see me doing things that I didn't know she saw me doing. This pertains because this lady, is the niece of Majeska Simpkins. And one of the questions, I know we always start out with September 11, 1963. And that is a very important moment. And we must talk about that desegregation of the University of South Carolina. But there is a backstory that I wanted to touch on too, which is, what made you think you could do that? You know what I mean? Like, what armor did the women in your family give you? Because there are all kind of interviews where you talk about what you had to do and what you felt. But your mom, your aunt, what was going on in that amazing house that gave you the wherewithal to come to this place and be alone, in a manner of speaking, to fight that fight?
Thank you. Huge question. Thank you all for being here. I think that I grew up in a home where issues of social justice, civil rights was always at the forefront.
Mm.
And it wasn't that they just talked about it, because at some points, you know, we were young and you don't listen to little people, little people just listen.
Right.
And, but they were always planning,
Mm.
always doing something. And that really is the key for me.
Mm.
Some people can talk change.
Mm.
Some people make change.
Mm.
And in my family, I could see people really making change. They involved us. When I was very young, there would be people who needed clothing or food. And some of it actually would come from the East Coast, Connecticut. A sister of my grandmother worked in service there. And she would send clothes and she would get people to send food. And it was a part of my job to separate things and to get them ready to be shipped off to places such as Clarendon County or wherever the need existed. So it was not incidental that one day I woke up and said, I want to work on issues of civil rights and civil justice. It was just what we did. And we did it really all the time. I can go back to my grandmother.
Your mother's mother?
My mother's mother, Majeska's mother. And we often start with Aunt Majeska. But we probably should start with my grandmother,
Yes.
Rachel Monteith, who was a teacher, who started a school for African American children, which is now an historic landmark here in the city of Columbia. That woman was fierce in her determination to make change. And she was a firm disciplinarian. She made sure that we did our part. She also made sure of something else. And I think of this often and don't quite know where to put it in my head. But she also made sure that we respected everyone. It didn't matter who they were or from where they came. And I remember walking down a street in Columbia one day, probably Washington, and some people were standing along, you know, in front of the stores. They say, good afternoon. And I would speak. And they say, you know, you're very strange because you speak back. And a lot of people just ignore us. And I've learned that that carries over now when I see people who are homeless on street corners or whatever. And I may give them $20, whatever I have. And then they'll say, my name is Marvin or something, wanting to make a connection.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that I would not be able to do that so easily had I not grown up in a home where everybody worked on something. And so the school was started, the Monteith School. My mother taught in the school. Some of my cousins went to the school along with others. And it's probably minor, but when they began to renovate the school so that it could become a community resource, I happened to be at the Kellogg Foundation, and I thought, I ought to be able to help with this. And we were able to send $50,000 to help with that. Now, I didn't have any business getting into that, but at the same time, it was something that I was committed to, and something that's put some merit behind the work that had started many years sooner. How did Majeska and my mother come out of all of that energy and focus their work? It's been interesting for me to think about Aunt Majeska
Mm.
because, you know, she worked in healthcare
Mm-hmm.
in South Carolina.
Like you are now.
And she, like I am now, and she, but you know, I didn't realize it until one day I just happened to stop and look back and say, she was doing this before.
The
And
world is round.
yes, exactly. And so I've been walking in her footsteps too. And I think that is a part of what is missing today in too many cases. Are people giving us enough so that we can walk in their steps?
Mm.
And it's not that people don't wish to give, I think. It's that we don't realize how important it is
Mm.
to do that work of walking with purpose and then having people understand what we were doing. It's a cauldron. It's a cauldron. And it was wonderful. Yes.
What's your take on that quote? I love this quote.
Well,
It's
you
like
know,
being superhuman, superpowers of a woman, being able to look in a curved line. Does that make
well,
sense to you?
Of course it does, because you cannot ever say, I have hit the wall. You have to say, I've gone around the wall, I've gone under the wall, I've gone over the wall. And that really is the way that, in some ways, I live now. If I am determined, and I'm not speaking about myself as someone who is so wonderful and all of that.
Right, right.
I'm just saying that if there's something that I think needs to be done,
Right.
I keep at it.
Mm.
And you don't win everything right away,
Mm.
but you also never give it up.
Right.
So that quote is really the way of saying, you can stand in front of me here,
Mm.
but I'll make my way around. And there's another quote, and I don't remember the author that I read some time ago, but it also says, once you see a thing,
Mm.
you have a responsibility to act. And so if we see issues that are wrong, we have a responsibility.
This so reminds me of, South Carolina has a history with black women and activism. We have Septima Clark, we have Majeska Simpkins. North Carolina as well, we have Ella Baker. We have all, that's to me, growing up and finding, beyond my own mother and beyond the women in my family, finding those sort of light posts out in the world who were, as you say, making a way out of no way. And so often, we're here to celebrate the African American woman in history. Those positions were always behind the scenes power and never out front power. But without the behind the scenes power happening, that out front stuff would have never happened. The organizing, the getting everybody in the same room and talking together, that kind of thing. So that matrilineal power, I know very well, and often talk to my female students and my male students about understanding that power comes in all kinds of ways. So my next question, the history of education. One of the things I love about your story and just kind of researching, getting ready for this moment, getting ready for the Olympics of talking to you. One of the things I loved is when you said, when you were asked, why did you want to come here? Why did you want to come to the University of South Carolina? And you said, I wanted an education, period. And I want you to talk about that a little bit, but I would love for you to talk about it in the context of, I was born and raised in a black community, in a black family. Education was the ultimate thing at the top. Each generation kept doing a little bit more than the last generation. That was the mantra in my household, in my community. You got to go on to the next level. our grandparents, my grandparents gave that to my mom and my father, and they gave that to me. In your household, in terms of that education, that simple thing you said, can you talk about context a little bit and where you got that drive to do what you did?
It's difficult probably to wrap it up in a few sentences. One of the things that we always had were books. If we did nothing else, we had books to read, and I was always sitting on a corner somewhere reading a book. So much so that my mother would say, her father said the worst thing they ever did was taught y'all how to read. Now y'all don't do anything. But we knew what he meant.
Right,
that was
right.
the way we
Compliment.
Yes, exactly. There was such an emphasis on getting ahead that we really had no choice except to, if you wanted to be in that stream of consciousness, that work, you would do everything that you could. Now it's important, the quote that you said, I wanted to get an education. It's important that we didn't say, I just wanted to integrate it.
Right.
Because that really wasn't not what it was about.
Right.
And I recall in the court, the Attorney General asking me, do you think you're going to like it at the University of South Carolina? Well, I don't know. That's what I said in the court. I said, I don't know. I'll wait and see. Because it wasn't about liking it. It wasn't about anything except an education and creating an opportunity for others. But I would say that so much of my energies to stay on course came from just watching my Aunt Majeska, my mother, just persist in their efforts to move us ahead.
Yes.
My mother was a part of a group that filed to get equal pay for black and white teachers in this Richland County. Took a lot of heat for it, and not necessarily from the white community. She took a lot of heat, and I could watch that heat and how it really was a painful experience for me, but she was a proud woman. So it's on a number of levels that education was important. I will teach my black children for the same pay that people teach white children.
Right.
We were always doing things. I said that your mother's gonna get me. We were always also looking at things. Every Saturday afternoon, my grandmother would have the Metropolitan Opera on, and we all were sitting there listening to the opera. And I'm sure there were times at the beginning when I wondered, why am I doing this? But now I so appreciate those experiences. Every Sunday morning after Mass, classical music played throughout the house. I think what I'm trying to say in summary is that there was an attempt, and it was successful, to set an environment for growing, for learning, for expanding our frames of reference. And you didn't really have to say, you're doing this because of, just saying, we are doing this.
Right.
And that's really it. And I had a grandmother who was a teacher, mother was a teacher, Majeska was a teacher. We just, that's what we did for the most part.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could get around it.
Do you remember some of the titles of those books that were all around you? The ones that, that made a difference to you personally?
I don't remember
Okay.
titles, but I can tell you that I read everything, and we were devoted to these encyclopedias that came out. And we would just start reading there, and it sounds crazy now maybe, but that's what we read too.
That's right.
And it just opened our eyes to the world that we never knew existed. I laugh sometimes when we children out there were several families living on the land, and we would get into trouble and the adults would say, I'm gonna take this and throw it to Halifax. I never knew Halifax was a city until I got there.
Wow.
And I realized that they had really educated us beyond what we, so, nothing was incidental.
Right.
I suppose.
Right.
Not to say everything was seen as, you gotta learn this now.
Right.
Nothing was incidental.
That's amazing. I have a story to relate to you that I think might symbolize your taking Aunt Majeska's quote and bringing it into your life. I could be wrong, and you can tell me that, but I just want to remind you of this moment, and you can tell me whether maybe this has a little bit to do with seeing around that wall. When it was announced that you were one of the students who would be entering USC in 1963, they published your name, and I think they published your photograph in the Gamecock, the student newspaper. There was a great deal of anger that came directed at you in terms of this moment, in terms of your name and photograph being there. And you stepped into this moment so clearly, Aunt Majeska's niece and your mother's daughter and your grandmother's granddaughter, if I may say. You wrote the Gamecock a letter as a result of them writing about you. You thought you would also take a moment to respond. I love this story. So you introduced yourself to the University of South Carolina by way of this. I'm sure it was a perfect letter, because I love letters, and I know you came from teachers, so I wish I could see it right now. You spoke of wanting to be a doctor and how you like to play the piano and all kinds of sports activities. You were so keen and cunning, I love this part, to mention and also congratulate Clemson University for so politely desegregating in such a manner and style that one should be, applaud. What? So not only do you slap them in the face sweetly, but you also give them something to think about in terms of their own humanity and their own way of reacting to change. And come on, Clemson, USC, you challenged them.
Yeah.
It's, this was like a blood drive back in. This was amazing and wonderful. So I thought, this is Dr. Treadwell taking that quote and doing this in your own way, taking the words from your aunt, but you were so young to do you remember writing that letter?
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think one of the things that stimulated writing back to them was the noise in the press, because I did not decide right away that I was going to enter the university. And the thought was, well, if she doesn't come, they're going to have to go through the courts again. And then the thought was, well, she hasn't sent us her records, her academic records, so maybe she's got bad grades and she doesn't want us to see them. And I was an honors student. I was admitted with advanced credit, so that wasn't it. But you have to find a way to engage. And the way to engage is not to say, you said this and I didn't like it. You go around.
See?
Excuse me,
See?
that's that word.
See?
But in fact, you find ways, and it's a way that I work now. Rarely a direct and frontal assault when in fact strategy and tactics will work. And that's
brilliant.
Well,
And it's also in a tradition.
Yes, absolutely. You cannot imagine how much time was spent in our family just talking,
Strategy?
strategizing. But Jess was going off to a Klan rally, coming back and telling us what she saw and did, and then what do we do now? What did they say? I mean, it was just everything. And let me also be clear. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We would organize, my grandmother would organize, and this is an important point, family picnics. She would just decide when she was going to do it, and they were huge. And they were just family, and anybody knows where we lived out there. The gate was shut, nobody could come in. It's family time only. And my grandmother kept her shotgun nearby in case anybody wanted to try to disrupt. She sent a message. But that was also another way of bringing us together
Right.
in fun. So
Right.
it wasn't always just civil rights. It was also, I mean, I remember today those days when you had all the food in the world spread out, and ice cream and watermelon and everything. I mean, it was just a dream. And I think that we have, and it was a way maybe of saying celebrate each other,
Yes.
love each other.
Yes.
And we did that. But, you know,
Beautiful.
fun.
Fun. I only have two more questions, and I think we have a Q&A, correct? Val, somebody? Do we have time for that? Okay. So, this is a question about the times we are presently living in. But I'm going to use a symbol from 1963 to hopefully make my point. Fritz Hollings was governor of South Carolina at the time and had been a one-time segregationist. He changed his mind in his farewell address to the General Assembly. I hope my colleague, Dr. Bobby, he can correct me if I'm wrong about any of this. But in his farewell address to the General Assembly, he said a very hard thing to white South Carolinians, primarily. He didn't say I'm speaking to white people, but he said, for the most part, he's up there. He said the courts have spoken, and he asked the people of South Carolina to accept desegregation. He said this for the good of South Carolina and for the good of the United States of America, quote, end quote. My question is, do you think that in today's political climate, this kind of desire to be better than we have been is still alive in this country today? Even about things he personally supported segregation. But he, in that moment, said, I have to step up and say to my state, the courts have spoken, and we need to be better than we have been. For that to happen in today's world, I wanted to know what you thought. Is that a bygone thing? Or are we still capable of that in this America that we live in right now? I just wanted to know what you thought.
Of course, I believe that we are capable. And I believe that the gathering this evening proves that people still want to build a more just and equitable society. I think that many people who we would want to be the leaders to speak out are failing us at this moment. But the only reason that I continue to be a part of sessions like this is that I want to continue to have younger people, you know, I'm getting up there,
We all
step into leadership roles.
That's right.
The leaders may not look like they did then. We may have been looking at people then, white men, whatever. Maybe it needs to come from a different place. And we can't, none of us can step away from our responsibility. And so I don't have a fear of what is not happening right now, other than where are we going to put our footprints? And it's being done. You know, what my grandmother used to say, trouble don't last always. So, you know, it's we got to go through this. But as we're going through it, we are not sitting silently and just saying, step on my hand and step on my foot and it's okay.
Right.
You just find a way to kind of get your foot out the way and keep walking.
Mm.
So I have hope. I have to have hope.
Yeah.
But I also have faith
Mm.
that young people are coming along, and all I want to do is to say, you got to fill the roles of those who came before. You know, a Majeska was a fighter.
Mm.
Might not work in that way anymore. I don't know.
Mm.
Could.
Mm.
But we've got to find a way.
Mm.
And everybody must find something that they will change.
Mm.
Something, maybe small. Maybe nobody will ever know you did it.
Mm.
But something
Mhm.
that changes our world.
Mm.
It will happen bit by bit.
Mhm.
But then added up together, it's going to be wonderful. It will. It can.
It can and it will. Last question. It's a personal one. It has to do with that young woman sitting behind on that amazing photograph behind you. I don't know. We didn't talk about who's on this picture. We should do that. To my far left is Attorney Lincoln Jenkins. Next to him is my sweet daddy, Ernest A. Finney Jr. Matthew Perry, attorney, daddy attorney, Matthew Perry attorney. Our honored guest here next to Attorney Perry, and our honored guest mother to her left. Her name?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, yes. So my last question has to do with science. Because that's your area, yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay. This may sound like a question that doesn't relate, but in my quirky mind, it does. You are a trained scientist. Your area is one of my favorite subjects in the whole wide world, cell biology. Did I get that right? Remember the film Hidden Figures?
Yes.
Oh, it came out a few years back. Those amazing black women who were like human computers, crunching numbers because they could, without whom John Glenn probably would never have gotten into space. That was 1949, 1950. You were just a little black girl growing up in Columbia, in South Carolina. I wondered, did you get wind that there were women like this in the world, in the subject that they told us we couldn't do? Math, science. Now, that might not have been happening in your house, but knowing black women in science who had these brilliant scientific minds, when did you get wind of that in your life? And did you want to step into that continuum as a black woman in science?
The reason I think science appealed to me is because there is a certain logic built into it. There are steps, there are frameworks, and so you can work your way through situations in a very methodical manner. And that I began to see, and I'm not sure when, but I still live by this. If I can figure out a way forward, I have to have the pieces of the engine assembled. So is that the scientist in me? Yes. Because I can't think any other way. I have to separate things into their component pieces, and then I put things together. And sometimes you can't put it together at one time.
Right.
But I probably knew something about, in fact, one of the first things that I was going to do as I had a Kellogg Foundation fellowship was to research women in science around the world, and I did that for a while. And I know that there is still an issue. That was many years ago. But I have gotten diverted into other issues that I think are equally pressing. And I use the same kind of tactics to work in my areas of criminal justice and reentry. So it's really a matter of assembling facts, which is what they did in writing equations and doing all of that. You assemble your facts.
Yes.
And I always encourage diversity in whatever it is you're doing. It's not enough now to be a straight arrow. You've got to really have some other attributes that you blend. People talk about team science. Well, in fact, there's team science and there's team building. And I think sometimes where we don't move ahead as much as we don't look to see where we can join forces. And that's something we must do. But I've never really, I think if there's anything I've thought about, it's going back to my Aunt Majestica's collection of old wives' tales, and then trying to look at them from a scientific perspective and say they weren't so crazy after all. Some of this stuff really works.
So we've come back to that curved line.
I've always, straight lines can be dangerous because you run right into a wall. So you've got to say, step back, assess, and decide which way should I go now, and you always have a second plan.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Oh, my
It's
pleasure.
been my honor and my pleasure to sit here and have a conversation with you tonight. Now we open it up for some questions.
Our friends at the Center for Civil Rights History and Research have already sent me the letter that you wrote to the Gamecock, which will be in the second iteration of the exhibit when it comes open in May.
Beautiful.
And it is a beautiful letter.
I bet it is. I told you.
I still write letters like that. Often the first draft is a little rough. Have to let it cool off.
It drives me crazy that we're taking handwriting out of the schools. That I can't even imagine not writing, not using my hands to communicate or express myself. I'd never be a poet without that fact. And my students who have never, some of them have not gone through a handwriting course or a letter writing course to know how to engage in communication in that kind of way. And I think it's a crime actually to our young people to not teach them that. But I'm not going to get on my.
Do we have any questions? Should I run that?
I can talk louder.
Okay.
I don't have a question per se, but I just wanted to let you know that I graduated from USC in 1981, and my coworker and friend did too. So we're just happy. We want you to see our faces, you know, that your work was well appreciated.
Thank you. I am proud to have many children.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Hi,
Can you act like an actor?
yes, speak loudly, yes. So much of your story and what you went through, coming to USC many years ago, I still think we're still, right now challenging the university to still become more diverse and to make our student body more representative of, the percentage of African Americans that live in our state, same for faculty and staff. What advice, I mean, you did this and you were a trailblazer, but we still have a long way to go. What insight or, can you speak to that at all?
One of the things that I have certainly recommended is that in outreach for students, that we go different places and find the students. It's not that they don't exist. It's that we have to find them, and we have to have them feel that this is a welcome environment. The faculty issues are the same. We have to find them, and some of the impacts on faculty, however, are criteria by which they are able to advance and support systems. And so I mentioned team science a minute ago. We need to talk about team research, et cetera, because people get isolated. And then they aren't able to make the moves forward that they need to. Or if they come in as junior faculty, they're overwhelmed with classes and they can't do the things that you need to do to advance. So I think from the faculty perspective, there would have to be a real commitment from the administration to say, how do we nurture and support so that we reach a goal? Is it an institutional value is a question that still has to be addressed. And I think that the only way it will be addressed is if we continue to raise it. You can't just say, oh, they're not going to do anything. Well, probably not if nobody ever asks. So it's important to just find ways. And I probably am not one that would find a way to say, why don't we have more people of color in here? I would think of other reasons for having that diversity and then approach it in those manners. Because black-white doesn't sell right now. You know, black, brown, white doesn't sell. But what does sell is the idea of we are becoming a very diverse nation, and we must be ready for it. If climate change doesn't get us first, we will have to really put our shoulders to the wheel. I find that many students are kind of discouraged. And I also found when I lectured here a couple of years ago that there is some real pushback among some students in the population against diversity. Do it anyway.
Thank you.
I think we have to keep fighting. And I think we have to keep presenting this university with what they aren't doing. There needs to be a diverse community of professors and administrators, because this school does not reflect any of that. And if you want to, just like you said, if you want to be in the future, you're going to have to reflect that, or you're going to be saddled with being pushed aside. And I don't think it doesn't sell, and I don't think people want to hear that, but I think we still have to keep saying it. This school does not reflect that they trust black and brown people at the high administrative level. So they certainly don't trust it on the professorial level. And they just barely trust it on the student level. And that is a shame, because this school has been around a long time. And in many instances, we've learned nothing from being around a long time. So sorry, the poet had to put her 2 cents in that, but
The one area that I think has been not spoken about enough is we don't have any problem recruiting all these African American young men to play football and basketball. And there is a financial incentive to the university. We sit on seats that are bought because these individuals play athletics and they bring in a hell of a lot of money.
yes.
And I don't think they see and understand their power. Now, I'm not suggesting they should get up and go marching and all, but I'm suggesting that she said, she said that. They could do that. But, you know, it's important to realize that I am more than, you know, just a tight end. I really am a significant player in this university. And in all of them, I mean, huge amounts of money are made with these young men. And you know, really and truly, when they're building a team, we know what they're looking for. So I think that we should really look at pockets where there may be some opportunity for people to develop a bit more of a political sense of their value, and then put that into use.
Amen.
So, I said I was going to try to do this without crying, but I already started, so I'm just going to embrace it.
Embrace it.
But one of the things that really captured me was as you were going over the picture, the image. I just want to acknowledge
Mhm.
Thank you. And honor our ancestors, mothers sitting here today. The way that Black parents show up for their children, your mother, they show up for other people's children to support them, your father. And as you shared, the spirit of walking in their footsteps. And so as I look at you, both literally sitting below their images and at their footsteps, as prolific scholars, national award winners, you know, we have to pay homage and give praise and the glory and the claps and everything that our parents truly deserve, because they have done so much to create all of this. You know, and I know that's how you started, with the honoring the family and the ancestors and everything. But I think it's such a powerful image to watch the two of you sitting amongst, beneath, below, with
That's really a great eye.
your family members who stood up so that you could become what you've become. It's amazing, and Black people have done that for so long.
Very briefly, I can picture her father at some point, not perhaps in actuality, but taking that baby girl up and offering her up to serve others, to walk the walk, talk the talk. And I think many of our parents have done that. I felt, quite frankly, that my mother, on this day in particular, just said, you now belong to something greater than before. And she let it go. I don't think it was easy for her, but she did it.
Wow. Okay, so you started this.
Yeah.
But I want to say two things. Two stories, very short. I'm my father's only daughter, and he named me Love Child. And it wasn't Love Child. It was Love Child because he wanted to imbue me with love from my people, love from my family, and love for myself. And because he wanted me to always remember I had come from love, even though the world would try and make it seem like I had come from something else. And so Val was saying I have a book coming out, and the name is Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry, because that's my father's name for me. And the title is written in his handwriting, because he wrote me letters and he wrote me notes for all of his life until his hand stopped working. And that's one story I want to tell. The second story is my mother. I've probably had 40 addresses across the country in my old lady life. At each of those addresses, my mother sent me ebony, jet, crisis articles, torn out, carefully cut into her letter. She would say, oh, here's something on Althea Gibson. Oh, here's something on Langston Hughes. That's where I first knew Black poets, from those Black publications. Everywhere I look, I have every letter she ever sent me. And in each of those letters is a news article about Black history. Not just in February. And I would look at those letters and I would say, this must be from Mom because it's fat, it needs extra stamps. She never wanted me to forget who I had come from. She never wanted me to question if I was proud of being who I was. And so wherever I went, California, Kentucky, wherever, there was an envelope. She said, what's your address? And I was like, I know what's coming next. Because they weren't teaching that in the school system. You had to get that at home or in the community you lived in. So for you to make that observation about how the fruit does not fall far from the tree, it is absolutely true, and it is absolutely something we must continue to do, I think. You already know that, and that's why you're here, to take this outside that door, on and on. Not just black folk, all of us. We can teach black history to our children, no matter what color or culture we come from. That's when it starts to change. That's really when it starts to change, when the water goes over the embankment.
So, I apologize, but we have a reception waiting for us.
We don't need food.
Where we can celebrate
Sorry.
these amazing women. Well, there's
Just
wine.
kidding. Oh, well, maybe you get that.
But can you help me to thank them from the bottom of my heart?